So what is fingerstyle guitar? Well, myself as a fingerstyle guitarist, like many fingerstyle guitarists, came from the rock and metal backgrounds, actually. I know my good friend Andy McKee, who has some courses here on TrueFire, came from the same kind of background. And when we play rock guitar, or traditional kind of electric guitar, we use a guitar pick, right? Many of you will know this from your MTV music videos of hair metal bands in the 80s shredding. Well, with fingerstyle guitar, when we get rid of the guitar pick, we realize we actually have access to 4 or 5 guitar picks in the form of our actual fingers. In my case, and many other players' cases, we actually also grow our fingernails to gross lengths so that when you're paying for something at a bar or buying a coffee, the barista recoils in horror or thinks you're trying to sell them drugs. Now, once you realize this potential, you can self-accompany, and that is the essence of fingerstyle guitar itself. The idea of being able to perform the bass line, the harmony, the melody simultaneously without the need for a band. Now, my approach to fingerstyle guitar really came from the fact that I grew up playing in a small town with not many other musicians around me. You see, I was really enthusiastic, hopefully like yourselves, of doing music for a living when I was a teenager. I was obsessed with music. Again, I'm sure that's why you're here today. But I couldn't really find many other musicians that shared that same drive and that same passion. So as a rock player, I decided to ditch the pick and head to the dark side of fingerstyle guitar and self-accompany so that I was not relying on other musicians or their schedules to go and do a gig. Okay? The first thing that I realized is that the thumb is an incredibly powerful tool when playing this style because it allows you to play that bass register, you see. You see here with a G major chord, my thumb is able to cover those bottom 3 strings, just like this, okay? Whilst the fingers are free to do whatever they want to do. Now that's the first thing that I'd like you to do in this course, is to take a chord you're familiar with. Right now, this is just a G major chord in standard tuning. I'm sure many of you are used to it. If not, it's fretted like this, 3, 2, open, open, 3, 3, okay? And just run that thumb between those bottom 3 strings, okay? Now, as a very first exercise in fingerstyle, you might struggle with the accuracy of this at first because you'll be so used to playing with a guitar pick, or perhaps this is your first time playing an acoustic guitar anyway. A thing that I use to help myself with this kind of accuracy is using my pinky, or my chico, my little finger here, as what's called an anchor. What I'm doing here is resting that finger on the soundboard of the guitar, and that gives my thumb a sort of reference point. So I'd like you to try that. Try playing with that thumb between various strings in that bass register and really get used to the accuracy there. Really get used to the geography of what your thumb's doing. You could watch TV whilst doing this. You could, listen to your parents argue whilst you're doing this. It'll provide you peace, I assure you. Once you're comfortable with that, you can start incorporating the other fingers. Now, to talk to you about these fingers and how they work within the context of fingerstyle guitar, I must give you the traditional names for these fingers so that we know what we're referring to as this course progresses. Now, the thumb is often notated as the letter P. That's P for Peter, or in this case, Pulgar. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not because I'm English. Pulgar. Now, this word is a Spanish word, as we will get to with the other fingers as well, and that's the language used in traditional kind of notation here for this kind of stuff. So P will be playing on these 3 strings. Now, traditionally, in fingerstyle guitar, we will then use I for the index finger, or in this case, indice, M, medium or middle finger, but it's medio with an O for your middle finger, and then A for your ring finger, which stands for annular. Okay, so we have pulgar, indice, medio, and annular. Okay, apologies, Spanish friends, for my pronunciation. Now, these 3 fingers are typically tied to the top 3 strings, just like that. So your index finger, or I, indice, on the G string, your middle finger, medio, on the 2nd string here, the B string, and your ring finger on the top string, the E string. So a really good exercise with or without the anchor finger here, in this, we'll do it with the anchor, is to play PPP, IMA, and then descending. See if you can follow me with this one. We're on a G major chord here. Very good. You can also mix up that pattern, you know, and really be flexible with it, again, whilst watching TV or whilst, you know, reading something or staring off into space, just to get your fingers used to those strings and to that positioning in whatever pattern you're comfortable with, okay? The idea is to get rid of the guitar pick and get used to the geography of your right hand, okay? Again, I would recommend using the anchor finger. Now, something that I do, and a lot of players do, is adjust where those fingers are being played depending on the context itself. There are often times where I actually use my index finger, indice, on the D string as well. Perhaps you might want to follow me here with a pattern just like this. PPI, MAA. Okay, so we have a finger kind of jumping between a few sets of strings there. Okay. Now, this is not a traditional technique, but sometimes in the context of what we're playing, it might be necessary. So it's definitely worth spending some time getting used to that as well. Okay. But typically, the thumb will be handling the bottom 3 strings, and the fingers will be handling the top 3 strings. Okay. Now, my personal approach to fingerstyle has changed somewhat throughout my development. When I was in college, or as we call it in England, university, I got into this style in a big way, and I did a lot of experimenting. Now, there weren't a lot of learning materials around at the time, so a lot of it was sort of trial and error, and myself kind of figuring things out. Funny story, I actually got into the genre itself when my mum, bless her, broke my electric guitar. I was playing a Les Paul in a rock band, and she dropped it one day, and as any Les Paul owners might know, the headstock cracked. Headstocks are very prone to crack on Les Paul guitars. And as it was being glued together, I changed the tuning of my guitar and started experimenting with the finger kind of thing here. We'll get into the tunings in another section in this course. But a few things about my technique came through little things like that, just happy accidents, trial and error. And the fact that my pinky is used as an anchor is something that's very common in certain genres within the umbrella of fingerstyle, which we'll get to later in the course. But I tend to use it all the time. Personally, I love putting my pinky out like this because not only does it add extra control as an anchor, as we've spoken about, but it also acts as an easy mute. I love just rolling my hand back and getting a nice little muted sound. It's almost like a steel drum, isn't it? Now, that's not necessarily a traditional fingerstyle technique, but it's something that's informed a lot of my creations over the years. In fact, for any fans of my arrangement of Somebody That I Used to Know, you'll notice that right at the beginning, I'm doing that exact technique, okay? And that wouldn't be possible without the pinky acting as an anchor, okay? So that's just one of the things that makes my approach maybe slightly different to a traditional approach. Now, another thing that I do that's slightly different to players like the great Tommy Emmanuel, for example, is that I use my thumbnail instead of a thumb pick. You might have seen players over the years have these little Dunlop white plastic thumb picks attached to their thumb, and that adds a lot of extra definition to the thumb's attack when they're playing things like... They get this nice kind of attack. Now, the reason I don't use a thumb pick is actually quite simple, is that I like to do a lot of other things with my thumb that a thumb pick will prevent me from doing. Later in the course, when we've got a little bit more proficient in some of the basic techniques, you'll see that I use the side of my thumb for various percussive techniques and all kinds of fun stuff like that. A thumb pick would prevent me from doing that. So that's why I don't use a thumb pick, and instead I favor using my thumb nail, which again is very gross and scares all of my ex-girlfriends. But there we go, we live and we learn and we progress. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that brief overview of fingerstyle guitar. We'll get into a lot more right-hand specifics later in the course. But let's dive on to the kind of gear you're going to need to partake in this course. A little bit about what I'm playing and what has informed those decisions over the years. See you in the next section.